My name is Cindy Manchelenko. I've been a registered nurse for 15 years now. I spent the last 11 years working in research as a clinical research nurse. And just recently in the last year, I started working on a new project, which is it's in clinical informatics, so it's something different, working in technology. But I spent the last 11 years doing research in mostly myeloma. So most of the clinical trials that I was involved with was coordinating the care for the myeloma patients on those clinical trials. So the point of clinical trials is in order to test new molecules and do the steps to make sure that they're both safe and effective. And this can take a number of years. So essentially from the time that a drug is found at the bench side, so in a lab, until the time where it gets Health Canada approved can take around 10 years. So it's a very slow-moving process, but it's a needed process in order to ensure that they're safe and effective. We also need to look at whether this new drug is better than whatever the standard of care is and the drugs that we're using right now, or is it working better in combination with some of our older medications? Essentially, there are 4 phases of a trial, phase 1, 2, 3, and 4. There's also a preclinical phase. So the preclinical phase is where the molecule is being studied at the bench. So this is really where they're doing the testing that's on a mouse model. And once they've deemed that it's working and it looks safe, so they actually do monitor the side effects in the mice, or even other larger animals, then they determine that it's safe to use in humans, or safe to trial anyway in humans. A phase 1 study is to determine what is the safe and tolerated dose of a drug. And also they're looking to see if it works, but mostly they want to see what is the maximum tolerated dose, or also to collect the information about any dose-limiting toxicity, so those would be side effects. So usually the drug dosage would start very, very low, and then they go up incrementally and very slowly. And it's usually just on a small cohort of patients. Once they deem that it is safe and tolerated and they find out some side effects, and they feel confident to go forward to a phase 2 trial. The phase 2 trial is really to give everybody the same dose of the drug, but now really determining what is the side effect profile and how well is it working. So this is where you're looking both at efficacy and also really dialing into the side effect profile. Once they've deemed that that has also met the criteria, or looks like it's safe, looks like it's effective, then they may decide to go on to a phase 3 trial. Phase 3 trials generally is used if you want to actually market the drug. And these are usually randomized trials, and you have to measure that drug against whatever your standard of care is. So in multiple myeloma, these are generally combination therapies. So you would be getting either the study drug plus or minus whatever the standard of care combination therapy is. So we would never leave a patient without any therapy. They would always be getting something. So it would just be a question of whether they were getting the study drug or sometimes a placebo. And a placebo is also called a dummy drug. It could be a sugar pill, or if it was an IV medication, if it was going into your veins, it could be just salt water or sugar water, in combination with whatever the standard of care combination medication is. If that is successful, that's when drug companies can actually go ahead and apply to Health Canada to see if they can market the drug. Or additionally, if the drug company wanted to gain some more information about the side effect profile or some more efficacy data, they can do a phase 4 trial. It's also called an expanded access trial. So they're just collecting a minimal amount of data there, again, just to make sure that that the drug is safe and effective. But they don't always go for phase 4. Sometimes they can submit at the phase 3 level to Health Canada and get approval. So there's really a couple of different benefits of going on a clinical trial. So one of them is just to give yourself an extra treatment option that wouldn't otherwise be available to you during your multiple myeloma journey. The other benefit is to gain access to a newer treatment sooner in your journey, which could end up benefiting you overall. Sometimes you can even access these clinical trials right when you're newly diagnosed. So we don't only do them in the relapse setting, we also do them in the newly diagnosed setting. So you can be thinking about a clinical trial right when you first get diagnosed, and you can talk to your provider about whether there's one that's open for you. So the way that we measure success in a clinical trial is, of course, we want to make sure that it's actually working. So we do look at response. So looking at your particular myeloma proteins and seeing how they react to the drug. And hopefully they've either gone away completely, or even if you get a partial response, we still measure that as a success. But we also want to make sure that it's well tolerated. So we do measure things like quality of life throughout the study, and we want to see that your quality of life has actually improved when you got the study drug versus when you're just on standard of care. And that's also a good measure of success. So the role of a clinical trial investigator is really to manage your care, make sure that you are well looked after, manage any of your side effects, answer any of your questions, and make sure that you're safe. And also they have to manage the entire clinical trial. So they have to have due diligence, is what Health Canada calls it, over every patient that goes on that clinical trial. So they kind of have sort of the high-level view of everything that's happening, and even globally what's happening with the data. And then they also are looking after you personally to make sure that you are safe while you're on that clinical trial. They could decide to take you off if necessary, if maybe your side effects are you're not tolerating very well, or if the drug just doesn't seem to be working. They also have that ability to take you off the trial, but they would also do that in a decision, conversation with you, the patient. When you get the consent form, that is your opportunity to really go through that consent form completely. It's going to give you the most detailed information. You can take it to your family, your close friends. You can even take it to your general provider if you want to, and you can show it to them. But talk to your research team, ask as many questions as you want so that you feel comfortable with that clinical trial. So make sure you take it home, have a good read, especially of the side effects. If you're worried about anything, contact them. But that really, it's reading that consent form is what will help you to decide if you actually want to go on that clinical trial or not. And remember that clinical trials are voluntary. You don't have to go on it. And you can also, even if you did sign the consent and go on the clinical trial, maybe you got one dose of drug and you want to withdraw from the clinical trial, you can withdraw at any time for any reason. So just remember that. Also, you will have to pass eligibility criteria, so you can read what the inclusion and exclusion criteria is in the consent form. It's all in there, so you can actually exclude yourself right away if you see something in there that you know right away that you're excluded for. Or later on, once we do testing, we also have to determine that your blood counts and everything, organs are all fit to go on to the clinical trial. So that will also lead to eligibility, whether you're included or excluded. When you go on a research study, you actually will have very close contact with your research team, so both your physician and your research nurse or research coordinator. And depending on if it's an oral therapy or an IV therapy, if it's an IV therapy in particular, so intravenous, you will have very close contact with your clinic as well and all the nurses there. So you can kind of think of everybody as being part of your research team. And because of the rigorousness of the clinical trials, we often have to see you quite regularly. And you're also given a phone number and email address. Some centers don't actually allow you to email, they prefer that you phone. But in most cases, you'll be given both contact infos of the research nurse or coordinator and also your provider, in order to call at any time for any kind of, if you have any side effects. They will also give you complete information, contact information, what to do, where to go in case of an emergency, and if it's after hours. All of that information is given to you upfront. And then actually at the end of a clinical trial, even though you've maybe stopped taking the drug for whatever reason, you're actually still followed for sometimes forever. So whether that's just once a month or once every 3 months, often you are still followed by that research team forever. So you're in very close contact with the research team pretty much from the beginning and onwards. So you can either ask your provider if there's a clinical trial available for you, either at that site or in your area, or you could do a search yourself. So you can either go on the Myeloma Canada website. Myeloma Canada actually lists all of the Myeloma Canada Research Network studies, so you can have a look at those. Or there's also links out on the Myeloma Canada website to websites such as clinicaltrials.gov.